They are comfy, we are live. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Tamina.
Should I start, ma'am?
Yes, Miss, you can start.
All right. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. It is with great warmth that I welcome you all to this session of Climate Action and Sustainability Department organized under the Women Ascension platform. It is my privilege to serve as your moderator for this impact driven discussion today. I am Samaha Seher, a psychology graduate and researcher from National University of Medical Sciences, Pakistan. I am passionate about community well being, sustainability, and human centered development, and I am truly honored to be here today as the Assistant Head to Climate Action and Sustainability Department for the 1 Million Leadership Program 2030. Today's gathering stands as a powerful reminder that climate action and gender equality are deeply interconnected, and that sustainable change begins when women's voices, experiences, and leadership are placed at the center of the conversation. Our session, titled Building Resilience and Sustainable Communities Lessons from the Ground, focuses on exploring how women around the world are driving real, lasting impact. In the face of environmental challenges, from restoring ecosystems and leading green innovations to strengthen the community networks, these women embody the strength, adaptability, and vision required for a sustainable future. This initiative is guided by the values of empathy, equity, and sustainability, and this also aligns with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 13, Climate Action, and SDG 5, Gender Equality. Through this dialogue, we aim to learn from lived experiences, share practical solutions, and reaffirm our collective commitment to building inclusive and resilient communities. For all the new joiners, I would like to introduce Women Ascension. Women Ascension is basically a movement rooted in purpose. It is a global initiative built on the belief that empowered women can transform communities, industries, and futures with the presence in our 134 countries and multidisciplinary structure spanning 10 departments from STEM, climate action to building, peace building, and media. It offers a space where women from all walks of life can lead, learn, and lift others. At its heart, Women Ascension isn't just about leadership, it's about belonging. It's about creating pathways for women to step into their potential while staying grounded in the empathy, collaboration, and service. Now, coming back to today's topic, I would like to introduce you to our esteemed keynote speaker, Ms. Maureen Mezzo. Ms. Maureen is a climate security researcher and a social impact leader passionate about how environmental stressors shape peace, stability, and community resilience. She serves as the executive director of Rafiki Foundation, where she leads women-driven land regeneration and food security projects in Kenya's drylands. Through her work, Maureen explores the intersection of climate vulnerability, conflict prevention, and sustainable livelihoods, empowering women farmers to transform degraded landscapes into productive, peaceful ecosystems. Guided by the values of empathy, equity, and justice, Maureen remains committed to advancing holistic well being and contributing meaningfully to the global health leadership. With that, I would like to invite Ms. Maureen Mezzo to begin this session. Ms. Maureen, over to you, ma'am.
Hey everyone, my name is Maureen Mezzo. Like our moderator said, I have a background in climate security research, and what we primarily do is to explore how environmental stressors influence social stability and conflict patterns. Besides that, I'm the executive director of Ekorafiki Foundation, and Ekorafiki Foundation is a women-led organization based in Kenya that works at the intersection of climate resilience, peace building, and food security. I'm very happy to be part of this discussion, especially at this critical time where climate change is shaping most of our livelihoods. And therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to steer a discussion around how climate change should be looked at from a micro lens rather than the macro lens that everybody is focusing on with regards to the COP30, with regards to how rising sea levels are influencing climate change, or rather how drought in the Sahel Desert is influencing livelihoods. But rather, I would like for us to focus on how climate change is influencing households in the local level, or rather in the community level. So at Ekorafiki, we work with grassroots communities. And how we do this is we understand that climate change is manifested mostly in the households. And what we mean by that is whenever there's climate change, the first people to experience it are families in households. How will this be possible? So if there's climate change, if there's drought, the first people to realize that they're experiencing climate change is their household, because they won't have food to eat, or pastoralists because they won't have grazing land for their cattle, or communities because they won't have water reservoirs that will support their livelihoods. And therefore, what we're trying to do at Ekorafiki is to try and approach climate change in a micro level by focusing on households. I don't know whether I should go ahead and do my presentation.
Yes, ma'am, you can go for your presentation. You can guide Ms. Zuwa for for moving your presentation to the next slide. So she will move it.
Okay, thank you. So like I said earlier, my expertise right now is on climate research. And ideally what this means is we are trying to understand the nexus between climate change and peace and security, or rather how climate change is fueling instability and insecurity. I have explored that space, and most of my materials or work is around the Horn of Africa. And this covers primarily Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya. And here we try to understand how climate change, the effects of drought or extreme weather seasons, floods, lead to insecurity and instability in the region, especially due to terrorism and violent extremism. And therefore, with today's presentation, I would like for us to cascade it down to our household level and try to interpret climate change in that particular manner. So the one who, so we will go to our first slide, kindly. Yes. So when we speak of climate change, most often it's always in grand terms. So we're always talking about degrees, emissions, global warming, climate policy, climate actions. But according to us in Ekorafiki and the community that we serve, climate change primarily lives in the kitchen. This is where firewood runs out, or rather this is where there's soil erosion and we can no longer plant our crops. Or rather this is where boreholes and dams are drying up. Therefore, we can no longer fetch water to cook at home. So according to us, the mother in the kitchen is the one that feels climate change first before the community and then the world. And therefore, with Ekorafiki, what we believe in is that when we are trying to address climate change, we need to start solving it from the household level. Of course, the household level encompasses a lot of things. There's a difference between a family and a household. So a family is the members that build up a family, mother, father, and children. But a household is literally everything that forms that family. So if you live in a compound, then your household will possibly be the family members, the staff, the animals that you're trying to rear, the piece of land that you live in. So ideally, that is the household. So basically, what we try to do is to try and understand climate change and how it affects these households, and then how this breaks into community fragments, and how this otherwise influences conflict and peace in these communities. Can we go to the next slide, kindly? Thank you. So in Kenya, there have been increasing numbers of food insecurity. And by this, I mean so many families are going hungry, and a very huge population of Kenyans live under $1 a day. And most of these communities in the olden times used to make food for themselves, used to feed their own families and take care of themselves. But right now, there's a lot of hunger and there's a lot of migration. And the reason as to why this is happening is because due to climate change, people feel the need to move from where they are living to areas where they can get better opportunities to feed themselves. And this has a ripple effect on the urban communities, or rather the other communities that they find there. So what I'm trying to mean is, recently we were doing a survey with a very small number of people, and we were asking them, what do you think is the main reason as to why there are instances of gender-based violence, or maybe instances of domestic violence in households? And what they will tell us is, often at times, especially these communities that we are working with, often at times when the husband is unable to feed their family, they choose to migrate, or rather they leave their household looking for better opportunities. And so they will leave the upcountry or the rural area to the urban area in search of a job. When that does not offer solution, then unfortunately, they end up marrying their daughters at a young age so that they are able to provide for themselves and their families. And this is a case example here in Kenya in a place called Kilifi. So what happens there is we have very high numbers of child marriages and early pregnancies because they were not able to feed their families, and they marry off their children to people that can afford to feed their families. And as a result, then there is a cycle of violence, gender-based violence in the picture. And then this, in a way, tries to show how, in a very micro level, climate change leads to conflict in communities. And so for that reason, because of the scarcity that this climate change creates and the fear that it builds on, then most members of the community try to find solution. And once the solution is not found, then they result in a survival mode, and this survival mode leads to conflict or disagreements in the community. Please take me to the next slide. Well, you would ask, what is climate insecurity, especially in a micro level lens? And well, according to us and Echo Rafiki, this is when drought hits, then it becomes a dry season, right? So it will be seen by one, maybe a farmer's wife decides to skip meal to be able to feed their family, or maybe a pastoralist decides to walk to a further distance to get grazing land for their cattle, or maybe neighbors start fighting for water points in the community. And this is how climate insecurity starts operating in now this micro level. Because if there is no water where I'm coming from, and there's only one borehole left, and we all need to distribute this water amongst ourselves, this creates scarcity. And with a scarcity mentality, then there is constant competition. I would want to feed my family. I would want to feed my cattle. And therefore, what happens here is communities start fighting for these resources with the hope of being able to provide for themselves. And at the same time, this escalates into insecurity and instability in that particular region. Let's get the next slide, kindly. Yes. And that said and done, I will get right into explaining exactly how Echo Rafiki tries to address the climate insecurity situation. So like I said, Echo Rafiki is a women-led initiative where we are introducing drought-resistant farming to women in dry lands in Kenya as a way to, one, feed their families, and two, economically empower them. So we did a we did our research before settling with the community that we want to work with, and we realized that most of these communities that we are working with experience climate change in different extreme levels. So, for example, the community that we are working with here in Kenya, which is called Rumuruti, there's a lot of internal conflict, especially among us in the tribal lines. And why this is the case is because these communities are constantly fighting over resources. They're fighting over land, they're fighting over water resources. And for that reason, there is no unity and there's no peace in that particular region. So while we were introducing Eco Rafiki, we asked them what exactly would look like a solution for them. And once they sat down, they told us that the most important thing right now, besides farming was an option, they were farming, but our farming was not producing as much enough to feed their families. Yeah, it was not producing enough to feed their families. And so what we decided to do is implement a project where they can still feed their families and still live in peace and harmony. How this was done was, initially, they were growing crops like butternut, they were growing crops like maize, they were growing crops like beans, but they were no longer surviving in the land. And because of soil erosion, most of them will not produce enough yield to feed them and also for economic purposes. And so we opted to come up with drought-resistant crops that will survive in that particular region, so that one, they're able to feed their families and also they're able to make money out of it. And we introduced sorghum and millet as a drought-resistant crop. And how we did that is we started by forming clusters of women. We are currently working with a total of 100 women in that particular region. So what that means is we have 3 clusters of women, 30 each. We group them and we allocate them resources. And how we do this is they already have access to their land, which they cannot farm because they don't have water. So we find women that are in the same cluster, in the same region, and we set up water structures for them. Say, for example, we dig a water dam or rather a well in a particular cluster that carries like 10 women, and we support them with infrastructure like water pumps and pipes to pump that water from that water catchment area to their farms. So once they do that, they grow that crop in a cluster. So say, for example, they're regenerating. If each one of them has 1 acre of land, that means they end up regenerating 10 acres of land by growing these drought-resistant crops. Of course, we are supporting them with sorghum and millet, but in an event where they can manage to access seeds like maize, beans, or vegetables, then they're allowed to still use the water we've provided for them to grow these crops in that particular region. Once we've done that with this cluster, then towards the harvesting period, we bring them together again and we come into an agreement that we are going to purchase those products from them. If we're not purchasing, then we're finding a potential partner to purchase those crops from them. And by the time they're harvesting, we already have market for these women. At the end of the day, they make money from this particular agricultural practice, and they also end up feeding their own families. So we started off with a small number of 10 women, and we've been able to multiply this to a bigger number. And now we are working with 100 women in 3 clusters across that particular region, hoping that we can expand this. So you remember when we said that we give them seeds and they plant these seeds and then we generate, we buy from them. Yes, once we buy from them, the angle here is the same. Unfortunately for us, these communities that we're working with are experiencing extreme hunger. And this also can be manifested even in schools, where you see kids walking distances from school to home because they do not have food and they need to go back home to find something to eat. Unfortunately for them, even when they get home, there's no food. So they will still walk a very long distance back to school. And therefore, what happens is we buy from these women the harvest that they grow, for example, sorghum, and then we do value addition. And how we do this value addition is we buy the sorghum, we work with co-packers, and we develop a porridge blend, a ready-to-drink porridge blend packed in Tetra Packs, and then we go distributing it in schools. We offer a model where the parent pays a third of the amount of money that is supposed to be paid for the porridge blend, and then we look for partners to support the other percentage that is left. Say, for example, we work with the government or we work with NGOs that are in that particular region. The parent only pays a third, and then the other 2/3 is covered by these partners. So that is the model that Ekorafiki is employing at this particular drylands, with the hope of cascading it to other regions. And so you might ask, how is this making it sustainable? So for us, sustainability is being able to practice the same thing over a duration of time and receiving the same positive results out of it. And in this case, it's on being able to feed yourself and your family. So we are making this porridge blend, but we are not trying to industrialize it by securing byproducts outside in an event where if we cannot get a supply, then we won't be able to get this porridge blend. However, what we are doing is we're using the same women, the mothers of these children in this school, to grow this sorghum. We buy from them and we prepare this porridge blend, distribute it in school in a very subsidized price. And therefore, as a result, there's now a cycle created from production to distribution to consumption and back to production. That is what Ekorafiki is doing in the community level. So this also accounts to now the superpowers that women have. There's a very beautiful image of a woman there holding vegetables, another woman doing poultry. So according to us at Ekorafiki, we consider women as our superpowers because they're the managers of climate resilience. In any case, they're the ones who determine what you're going to eat at home. They're the ones who know how to source for fuel. They're the ones who know how to secure water. So we find them, we get them as our superpower because without them, then we won't be able to eat at home. Or rather, without them, we won't be able to eat nutritious meals. The second reason as to why we regard them as our superpowers is because most of the traditional indigenous knowledge that they carry are being manifested in the project that we're trying to implement. So what we are trying to do is not an idea that is borrowed from outside, or rather we are trying to implement like a global angle to it. We are trying to use whatever we have in the community level, a traditional tool to build resilience for these women. And therefore we regard them as our superpower because they are the ones who carry this indigenous knowledge. They're the ones who carry this traditional knowledge that we are transferring to our women. Yes, can we go to the next slide kindly? Yes, so I've already explained how we are trying to implement our project at Ekorafiki, and based on our presentation, so there is now the drought-resistant tolerant crops like sorghum and millet that we're growing. I would like to mention that in the region that we're working with, which is a dry land, we've been able to regenerate at least 25% of that land. This is virgin land that has never been planted. It's bare. So we have been able to like regenerate 25% of it. And we are still in the looks of partners who will help us source for tree seedlings to grow in this particular region so that we also build a water catchment area. And now the vegetation will not only rely on agriculture, the farming, but also on natural biodiversity that is being brought by now the trees that we're trying to introduce, or probably the livestock rearing and the poultry farming that we're also trying to introduce. Can we go to the next slide kindly? Yes. So when we're starting Ekorafiki, just like any co-founder or an executive director, one of the biggest worries is always where do we start? Where do we start from? Do we need to like secure capital? Do we need to get funding to start? Where do we even start from? Like, what is the genesis of this entire project? And so when we were onboarding on this project, I was lucky to join a fellowship that is supporting youths towards a planet positive success in the world. Sorry, and therefore, through the program, I managed to learn a few concepts that preferably would help someone who is listening in that would want to try and implement something in the community. And their biggest fear is on how to start. And so, yes, and so what we do is we learned the skill of building on partnerships and collaborations. What we mean is this. So when we went to Rumuruti, Laikipia, that place does not receive a lot of humanitarian aid, unlike most drylands in Kenya. It is not the same as Samburu, it's not the same as Turkana, for those that understand how Kenya looks like. So what that means is there is little aid that this community is receiving. However, there were companies in the area and there are government bodies in the area that could equally offer the support and the help to help these communities. So what we did was send out partnership letters to them. There is a horticultural farm in the region, and they have access to water and irrigation structures. So what we started out with before we even built that dam was to approach them and ask them, we would like to know how you went ahead to set up a very good water system, because we intend on implementing something similar and would want your guidance. And they went ahead to send in support and partners that would guide us across the entire process. And to some degree, some of them even offered resources for free. Another example was when we were starting out, we needed seeds. And getting these seeds were not easy because we wanted to get local seeds. And the ones we tried out with first did not give us as much yield as we were expecting, mostly because I think most of them were 10 generation seeds. And by that I mean, maybe these are seeds that have been grown the first time and then regrown the second time, the third time, until probably phase 6 and phase 7. So they cannot yield as much as these seeds that are grown for the first time. And so we sought for like partnership with organizations and companies that could help us access seeds and that have seed banks, indigenous seed banks. And now from there, we started out the process of growing this in these communities that we are working with. And then finally, another angle we went on to approach was the government was trying to implement something similar in that particular region, but unfortunately, they did not have a list of community members that they could work with. So we went ahead to mobilize these people, these women, and we formed a community for them. So these women, as we speak right now, they have a self-help group. So we formed that community with them, and then we introduced them to the government, and now the government is able to implement whatever project they wanted to implement, but through these women and other community groups that have been formed since that time. And so I feel like if we sit back and wait to secure capital, secure funding, or rather to get the best and the perfect structure on how to implement our ideas, then it will never be possible. I believe in the ability to capitalize on partnerships and collaborations. And by this, I mean, if you cannot do it yourself, if you do not have the resources, if you do not have the knowledge, if you do not have the know-how on how to do this, then outsource this from someone that can do it. If you want to start a project on water conservation and you do not know how to conserve water through, say, for example, you want to use generators, or maybe you want to use solar powered generators. If you do not know how to do that, then secure partnerships and collaboration with someone who's already trying to implement that information. And then out of that, work with them, partner with them, and incorporate your own idea into that project so that you're able to maximize on whatever you're trying to deliver into that community. Do not wait until you have everything for you to be able to like implement these ideas. Yes, I think this will be our last slide. Kindly go to the last slide. Oh yeah, that will be our second last slide. Yeah, let's go back to the lessons from the ground, kindly. Thank you. So I started out by explaining how climate change is being manifested in the micro level, and we touched on how climate security is manifesting in households. And so these are the lessons that I learned while trying to implement this, and through all the fellowships and the conferences that I've been able to attend, and the knowledge exchange that I've been able to be a part of. And so lesson number one, when I was starting out, I was chasing international grants a lot. I was always looking for grants. Is there a grant by Halt Price? Is Earthshot giving out grants? Do Bill Gates give out grants for climate change? And then this one at some point is a very good strategy, but you end up losing focus the moment you do not receive these grants. And so when I realized getting these grants is not as easy because there's a lot of competition in this space. And at the end of the day, we need to build climate resilience, because climate resilience is not going to wait for money. It is not going to wait for these grants. It is still, climate change is still going to happen whether we have grants or not. And so the lesson that I learned was it is equally important to just look at what resources you have at your community level that will support you in the fight against climate change. If you're building climate resilience, then use the resources there. You have women, they know how to predict weather, they know how to read rains, they know how to test soil using the indigenous traditional knowledge. So instead of waiting for these international grants so that you can implement some of these projects, it's equally important that you start looking at what you have at your disposal at that particular community level and use that to empower your community and probably build something that is supporting that community against climate change. Lesson number 2 that I learned was also the need to decolonize climate action. So unfortunately, climate action has been looked at the lens of a macro problem, right? Everybody is looking at climate action at a very big angle. People are looking at climate action with regards to carbon credits. And people are looking at climate action with regards to energy saving vehicles, which is a very, very good strategy. But if you want to lead a grassroots community project and seek to support that community against effects of climate change, then it's equally important to decolonize this community action. It is important to look at traditional low-cost solutions that are present in that community rather than importing expensive solutions that other people are trying to borrow outside somewhere else, or rather people are trying to do in other countries. The type of solutions that we are implementing in Kenya, despite the fact that climate change is affecting all of us almost in similar measures at this particular time, of course not in similar measures, there are people that are experiencing it worse than others, but if it's hunger, there are communities that are experiencing hunger across the country equally. And so therefore, whatever is working somewhere else does not necessarily have to be something that will work in Kenya. If it is very expensive and they're implementing it in Europe, it doesn't mean that you need to wait until you secure euros to implement it in your country. Start implementing with the resources that you have at that particular point. Find solutions that are cheaper and affordable. Why? Remember, climate change, as we said in the beginning of this, is manifested mostly in households. It is manifested in these houses that we live in. As a Kenyan, I grew up in a house where my mom will sacrifice her plate so that we'll eat. She used to work in a restaurant. She'll sell food in that restaurant and get money, and she'll still carry the remaining food that has been left in that restaurant to come and feed us. And often at times, the food would not be enough. Imagine you are working around food and you cannot even afford to eat that food because you fear if you serve a plate for yourself, then that's 100 shillings that you lose, or rather $1 that you lose. It was that bad. And yeah, of course, this was a very small hotel. It wasn't like a big, massive hotel. It was more like a cafe. But again, I think you get the picture. These are challenges that we're experiencing in our own households. When you go to the government level, they're talking about climate change in big magnitude. They're talking about climate change with regards to, say, for example, trees being cut down, and now we lose our vegetation cover. But at the household level, most of this does not necessarily impact us directly, right? If the trees are being cut down, it does not have like a direct, immediate effect on us at home. We probably feel it later because we won't experience rain, but at that particular time, we won't experience it. But when we lack food, or rather we lack clean water to drink, then that's an immediate issue that we need to address. So it is equally very, very important to work with the resources that you have at that particular level to support yourself and your community at that particular level, because before you're able to cascade it to an even higher and a bigger ground. So let us finish with the last slide. And on the last slide, I just wanted to take that opportunity to try and explain what climate resilience means to me. And according to me, climate resilience is the capacity of the people, the community, and the ecosystem to anticipate, absorb, recover from, and adapt to climate shocks while still moving forward. What this means is, even though we've not experienced rain for a whole season or 2 seasons, we knew there won't be rain because we were able to anticipate it. We had early warning signs, and therefore we were prepared. We had already saved up water for ourselves. We had already saved up dry food and cereal for ourselves. And therefore, in an event where there is extreme climate change, we can still survive with the little that we had saved up for ourselves and with the mechanisms that we had built up or the systems that we had developed for ourselves before it starts manifesting in extreme measures where we'll need other people to intercede for us. Yes, so that was the presentation I'd prepared for you. Thank you so much for listening in. I'll give it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maureen, for your. It was really wonderful hearing all these from guidelines from you. Now we'll move towards the question answer session from the fellows. There is one question from Amira Samani, and she's asking that developing countries contribute the least to the global emission but face the worst climate impacts. How can global climate policy move beyond pledges to ensure real accountability and equitable financial mechanisms? What would you like to say to this, Ms. Maureen?
Yeah, so are we going to answer one question each or should we combine all together? But I can still go ahead and answer that question. Let me read it again.
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah, so developing countries contribute the least to global emissions but face the worst climate impacts. How can global climate policy move beyond pledges to ensure real accountability and equitable financial mechanisms? This is a very interesting, it is a question, and it's a very alarming situation because, of course, when you do research, the continent that is impacted the most with climate change happens to do the least to contribute to that climate change. There is not as much advanced industrialization in these countries. There is little, there is pollution, but not to the extremes that these other polluting or rather these contributors do, but we end up being the ones that are receiving the brunt effects of this climate change. And so the question is, how can global climate policy move beyond pledges to ensure real accountability and equitable financial mechanisms? I'll give you an example. I did a research recently, and we were researching on climate refugees. I don't know whether you are all familiar with who climate. Okay, of course, I know you are familiar with who climate refugees are, but let me give you striking numbers. So when I was doing my research on climate security in Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya, we realized that conflict was one of the main reasons as to why communities were being displaced in these particular regions because of the effects of terrorism and violent extremism and intercommunal conflict. But recently, climate change is taking up the biggest number of displacements. And how is this manifested? It is manifested by, in the region of Somali, communities are leaving their homes and relocating to refugee camps to get assistance and aid because they can no longer feed themselves. But according to the global policy that we have on refugees, climate security is not being recognized in that particular framework. So even if I'm running from a country to another country for better living conditions as a refugee, then I cannot be attributed or rather be recognized as a climate refugee. I am attributed and recognized as a conflict refugee. And what does that mean? That means when you're coming up with mechanisms or strategies to implement on protecting these refugees, most of them will be tailored towards conflict related rather than climate change related. And there is where we go wrong, because when it comes to like displacement, countries, Africa experiences a very large number of displacements, especially those at the horns of Africa, right? Even at the Sahel region or the Sahara area. But most of them are not recognized, and not so many mechanisms and global policies are taken to protect this community. And so when you ask about what we can do to ensure that there is real accountability and equitable finance mechanism, I would go back to mention the need for climate financing as one of the strategies that we can implement. During COP, most of the COPs that have been held, there is money that they're always discussing about countries contributing and putting aside for climate financing. But they do not discuss on how they are going to cascade these financial structures down to the grassroots level. And therefore, even if there is climate financing, then we do not know how communities in these regions that are affected the most by climate change how they're going to get access to some of this financing. And therefore, most of this is lost in translation, right? Another good example is on the carbon credit. They implemented the idea on carbon credit, which is a good idea, right? But with regards to climate, to implementation, for example, here in Kenya, there is a whole documentary trying to explain how the Maasai community here in Kenya have been duped of their land and their money by foreign companies who claim that they are going to help them calculate, through carbon credits. And therefore, they use their land, grow trees, calculate the carbon credits, and pay them minimum wages. For example, an acre of land, you're being paid 100 Kenyan shilling. That is $1, which means in a year, if you have 5 acres, just because you planted trees and you're calculating carbon credit, you only earn 500 Kenyan shillings. So these are some of the policies that they're trying to implement, but they did not. I don't think they have considered how this should be implemented at the grassroots level, or rather how they should be broken down so that they can help the people in the community level try to protect themselves and equally champion for climate change. And these are some of the policies that need to be looked at in detail. I may not have the perfect answer on how we can ensure that there is accountability and equitability, because that is not my area of expertise, unfortunately, for now. But I know some of these policies that do not serve us very well, that need to be relooked and need to be restructured so that they can also support people that are experiencing these challenges in a whole different angle, or rather in the community level. Yeah. That is the answer I have for that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maureen. You're right. We can move beyond pledges by taking it as a collective action and having a shared hope towards a better future. We have another question for you, ma'am. Is there any idea that we can bring curriculum in schools related to climate resilience?
Yeah, thank you so much, Salma, for asking that question. That's a very interesting question, because here in Kenya, where I'm coming from, there are already projects that are trying to introduce climate resilience in our school curriculum. Mm-hmm. Of course, I think where we need to start off with is the curriculum that we have in schools, and talking to our governments to see how climate change can be, or rather climate education can be integrated into those structures, syllabus and curriculums. But what I have seen organizations do here in Kenya is we have organizations that use climate games and climate engagements to teach children in schools. There's an organization also that I see that uses IT and AI to also introduce climate education in schools. Unfortunately, this is limited to elite schools, or rather rich people's schools. And how they do this is they prepare, say, for example, VR materials, and in those VR materials, they have climate education materials, and then they share it in these schools, and kids are able to learn about climate education. Or others probably prepare engagement materials like books, small short story novels, that use animation and characters to educate children on climate change. But for your question, I think we need to start by engaging our government and our education systems and have them integrate climate education in our curriculum. So when a child is growing up, they need to start learning what climate change is and how they are contributing to climate change through their human activities. Besides that, it is equally very, very important to introduce green jobs in our curriculum. When I was in school, we were being told for you to measure your success in life, then you're supposed to be in these traditional elite jobs that everybody knows. You're either supposed to be a doctor, you're either supposed to be a lawyer, a pilot, an accountant. Nobody told us how important it is to learn forestry, land surveying, agriculture. Hell, not so many people, actually, children in school would like to be farmers when they grow up. That is a job that has been limited to like poor people or people in the rural area. But if we try and introduce climate education in these schools and teach them on green jobs and how they can participate and enhance our environment and support us in the fight against climate change, then that will be a very nice angle towards approaching it. So we need to start by engaging our governments and see how we can integrate climate education from our syllabuses down to now the levels where we as organizations are going to schools and teaching children on what climate change is. So that is the structure I would imagine would follow. I hope I've answered your question, Salma. Yeah. There's a question by Nene, and it's a case where human activities exacerbate rapid depletion in the ozone layer, leading to increased emission of greenhouse gases. What's the place of petroleum in climate action? Interesting question. But do I really know that information to be able to share and educate someone? I do not have as much knowledge around emissions and petroleum. But what I know is there have been actions and there have been initiatives that are trying to phase out petroleum because it's dangerous for the environment. And therefore, as much as that is a little paradoxical, we also understand how important it is and how cost effective and economic it is to use petroleum over the options that we're being offered outside here. But with regards to, I don't know, I feel like I'm just going in circles while answering this question, mostly because I do not have as much knowledge around that. But I believe petroleum is a product that needs to be phased out because it's not very good for our environment. There's a lot of carbon dioxide emitted through petroleum, but we also know that it is equally very, very affordable to use petroleum compared to the other alternatives that are being offered. And so maybe slowly phasing it out, introducing clean energy systems, but in a way that the society, the community, and the entire ecosystem can easily adapt to it. I don't know whether that makes sense. By this, I mean, of course, we are using petroleum in infrastructure, we are using it in transport, we are using it while making food and everything else. But I think it is something that we cannot do away with it completely. This is based on the limited knowledge I have with regards to petroleum. However, I think when we're introducing clean energy, it will be easier and better to just start with products that are a little affordable, and we can't just phase it out, off immediately. We need to start reducing it in quantities until we are able to do away with it completely. That is what I can say as of now. I am hoping someone else will have an answer to it. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for answering that. I would like to ask you another question.
Yeah.
How can one person advocate for climate resilience with limited resources, and how we can motivate individuals to adopt to sustainable livelihood?
Sorry?
How
Please
one
come again.
person can advocate for climate resilience with limited resources, and how we can motivate them to incorporate sustainability into their lives.
Okay.
At grassroots level, how we can initiate this?
That is actually a very excellent question. I like that answer because at least I'm getting a question in my area of expertise. And so I think one way is it is important for this one person to understand some of the low resources action that can be implemented in communities that are experiencing climate change. And a good example would be, say, for example, you're living in a community that is experiencing drought, or rather probably there is flooding. One of the ways that you can implement some ideas without as much knowledge is implementing water catchment resources that ideally would help. And this does not necessarily mean that you start by digging a whole dam or setting up a whole irrigation system. What that means is start by empowering communities around you to catch water through their roofs. Let them use gutters to collect water. Let them transfer this water into shallow wells, and maybe for you to avoid evaporation, let them grow water lilies to protect the water from evaporating. Another way that you can do that is you introduce small ideas like micro gardening. If your angle is to look at food production, then micro gardening, even in urban areas where you're teaching people how to grow crops in we call them gunia. How do you call it in English? In small buckets, or I don't know the word, but there's this woven bag that we normally use to carry things like fertilizer, seeds. There's where they're packed. So you can use that to like grow food in those areas. There's also where you can integrate like things to do with no cost cooling ideas, where you use when you live in a community where there is dangerous heat waves, and this is an example of, say, for example, communities in Nigeria, then maybe educating your community or people in the community on how to DIY installations, maybe use, maybe they need to not sleep on bed and sleep on the ground floor, because then the ground floor will give off some cooling effect, or maybe using cardboard to construct, or maybe building the window facing the sun. I don't know whether that makes sense, but there are these small ideas that you can just implement that our traditional mothers have been using from time, and they have always worked. So that is one. And then the other angle is using the resources that you have at the community level, indigenous knowledge, of course, knowledge exchange, intergenerational conversations. Our mothers have a lot of traditional knowledge, how they used to detect when it's going to rain, which seeds will work at what particular level, which herbs will treat which disease. Incorporating that generational knowledge to our current modern knowledge, where the Gen Zs, or rather the young people, know how to use technology, how they know how to use AI. So you can just integrate those knowledge from older generation and the new knowledge in the younger generation to come up with ideas that will ideally work. You don't have to rely 100% on IT. You don't have to rely on AI. You don't have to rely on technology to offer solutions. You can use whatever they were using in the past, integrate it to whatever is changing right now, because it will make more sense when people can relate to it, and therefore when things change, you need to like try and align with the changes. So maybe integrating those knowledge with the current local knowledges and the current technology that is happening at the moment, AI, that you can come up with a very good, interesting solution for yourself. Yes. Something else I think that will be a key takeaway will be, if you want to introduce climate resilience in your community and don't have resources, please use advocacy and create awareness. You can start by talking to people, bring them together, sit them down under a tree and tell them the effects of, using fertilizers, harmful fertilizers for their crops. Explain to them how not conserving the water that they received in the previous season will affect them when there is drought. Sit them down and talk to them about how they can use the little resources they have at home to feed for themselves and also create employment for themselves. There is a case example of a woman that we are working with. She has access to 5 acres of land, and her family was constantly going hungry. They experienced hunger at an extreme level because they could not be able to feed themselves, despite the fact that they had access to a very large piece of land. And therefore, when we went there, what we did was simple. We just tried to set up a water system for them. The community came together. They dug a very shallow well, very shallow, by the way, and we got like paper, the black paper that they put down, and then we carried water using jerry cans and we poured there. So for like 3 days, 4 days, we were supporting her to grow vegetables at a small sector of that piece of land, and within like a week or 2 weeks, she was harvesting vegetables from there. We did not have to put in any resources, as much resources. We just showed her that she could actually maximize what she has at that particular time. And moving forward, she's never asked for support. She's never waited on aid or food to be able to feed her children. She grows whatever she has at that small piece of land that she lives in. So you can actually do as much with the little that you have at your disposal. You don't have to wait for like big financial support to be able to do anything. Just use whatever you have. People, knowledge at times is even power. Taking tanks to people that don't need tanks is a waste of resources, but sitting down with them and telling them the importance of those tanks then would make more sense for them. So start by creating awareness and building community engagement, and then slowly by slowly, once you get traction and once you build a portfolio for yourself, or rather you build an image for yourself, then it's easier for you to go to companies and the government and ask them to help you get funding so that you can now scale this idea into a bigger scope. I'll give a story. I'm sorry if this is longer than what should have been. When we were starting off, I knew that it would be hard for me to approach organizations to get support from them in terms of like funding or materials or infrastructure. I knew I had to do something to show for what I am doing. So if I wanted to help people feed themselves in a community level, there's so many people are trying to do that idea. And so how do you make yours unique? How do you make it relevant? And how do you make it possible to implement and replicate in other regions? So I just started off with what I had. I sat down with people, I mobilized some small funding from a family, and I worked with a small number of people in a community. And since then, knowing that I've been able to prove concept, it's easier for me to knock on doors and help talk to them to guide and support me, because they can now see that whatever I'm trying to tell them is actually possible. We've already implemented it and we can prove that it actually works. So it's easier for you to just pump money into this project because there is proof of concept. Rather than you go ask for money from people, you're not the only one who's asking for that money or that grant, and you expect them to give you because you want to preach climate resilience, so you want to support communities that are affected by climate change. Just start with what you have a proof of concept, then start knocking on those doors, ask them to help your community to scale that project to a bigger audience. That way, this can be replicated in other areas in your region, not just the place that you're working with. If the government can prove concept, then that is something they can borrow and implement somewhere else with the same conditions. That is how you build climate resilience with the little resources that you have, actually. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Those are some wonderful ideas that you shared with us that we can implement in our daily lives and start somewhere. That's the basic point, that we all have to start somewhere for the path of sustainability.
Yeah.
So
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So if anyone has any more questions, they can raise their hand or drop in the comment section. And after that, we'll hand it over to Ms. Odeta, Head of Climate Action and Sustainability Department. If anyone has questions, they can simply raise their hands. All right, over to you, Ms. Odeta.
All right. If there is no any question, any comment, as we are concluding today's session, I want to express my deepest gratitude to our speaker, Ms. Maureen Meso from Kenya, and all the participants for your active participation, your question, sharing of your experience and expertise. I hope we have all explored the transformative power of local and women climate solution, as well as the climate leadership. So I want us to carry this forward, the momentum and inspiration from today's discussion, to empower ourselves and our communities to take action. I think together we can drive this meaningful change and build a more resilient and sustainable future. So if there is no any comment, I want to ask our admin and our co-host if there is any comment. Over to you, then our moderator, you can finish the session. Over to you, our moderator then. Samaha.
Thank you for your words. Thank you all for being here today, for lending your time and to voice this essential conversation, because the path to resilience begins with collective action and shared hope. As we conclude today's session, I extend on behalf of everyone our sincere appreciation to our speaker, our participants, and everyone who participated and and discussed and participated in this session. Your presence and insights have helped illuminate the deeper dimension in this important conversation today. Now, I would like to end this session on this note. You can leave the meeting now. Thank you so much.